The House of Leaves is a book by Mark Z. Danielewski, which I mispronounced. I do not claim to own this book nor this story, and it is better viewed in person, in physical form, than heard over some audiobook. But I will do my best to depict this book and tell this story in the only way I can. So, listen now, as we delve deep into the madness that is the House of Leaves. This is not for you. I still get nightmares. In fact, I get them so often I should be used to them. I'm not. No one ever really gets used to nightmares. For a while there, I tried every pill imaginable. Anything to curb the fear. Excedrin PMs, melatonin, L-tryptophan, Valium, Vicodin, quite a few members of the barbital family. A pretty extensive list, frequently mixed, often matched, with shots of bourbon, few lung-rasping bong hits, sometimes even the vaporous confidence trip of cocaine. None of it helped. I think it's pretty safe to assume there's no lab sophisticated enough yet to synthesize the kind of chemicals I need. A Nobel Prize to the one who invents that puppy. I'm so tired. Sleep's been stalking me for too long to remember. Inevitable, I suppose. Sadly, though, I'm not looking forward to the prospect. I say sadly because there was a time when I actually enjoyed sleeping. In fact, I slept all the time. That was before my friend Lude woke me up at 3 in the morning and asked me to come over to his place. Who knows, if I hadn't heard the phone ring, would everything be different now? I think about that a lot. Actually, Lude told me about that old man a month or so before that fateful evening. Is that right? Fate. I'm sure as hell wasn't full. Or was it exactly that? I'd been in the thrones for looking for an apartment after a little difficulty with a landlord who woke up one morning convinced he was Charles de Gaulle. I was so stunned by this announcement that, before I could think twice, I'd already told him how, in my humble estimation, did not at all resemble an airport, though the thought of a 757 landing on him was not at all disagreeable. I was promptly evicted. I could have put up a fight, but the place was a nut house anyway, and I was glad to leave. As it turned out, Chucky de Gaulle burnt the place to the ground a week later. Told the police a 757 crashed into it. During the following weeks, while I was coaching. During the following weeks, while I was couching it from Santa Monica to Silver Lake looking for an apartment, Lude told me about this old guy who lived in his building. That had a first floor apartment. Peering out over the wide, overgrown courtyard. Supposedly, the old man had told Lude he would be dying soon. I didn't think much of it, though it wasn't exactly the kind of thing you forget either. At the time, I just figured Lude had been putting me on. He likes to exaggerate. I eventually found a studio in Hollywood and settled back into my mind, numbing routine, and as an apprentice at the tattoo shop. It was at the end of '96. Nights were cold. I was getting over this woman called Clara English, who had told me that she wanted to date someone at the top of the food chain. So I demonstrated my unflagging devotion to her memory by immediately developing a heavy crush on this stripper who had Thumper tattooed right beneath her G-string, barely an inch from her shaved pussy, or, as she liked to call it, the happiest place on earth. Suffice to say, Lude and I spent the last hours of the year alone, scouting for new bars, new faces, driving recklessly through canyons, doing our best to talk the high midnight heavens down with a whole lot of bullshit. We never did. Talk them down, I mean. Then the old man died. From what I gather now, he was American, though, as I would later find out, those who worked with him detected an accent in him, even though they could never stay for certain where it came from. He called himself Zampano. It was the name he put down on his apartment lease, and several other fragments I found. I never came across any sort of ID, whether a passport, license, or other official document, insinuating that yes, he indeed was an actual and accounted for person. Who knows where his name really came from? Maybe it's authentic, maybe made up, maybe borrowed. A nom de plume, or my personal favorite, a nom de quere. As Lude told it, Zampano had lived in the building for many years, and though he mostly kept to himself, he never failed to appear every morning and evening to walk around the courtyard, a wild place with knee-high weeds, and back then populated with over 80 stray cats. Apparently the cats liked the old man a lot, and though he offered them no enticements, they would constantly rub up against his legs before darting back into the center of that dusty place. Anyway, Lude had been out there very late with some woman he'd met at a salon. He was just after 7 when he finally stumbled back into the courtyard, and despite the severe hungover, he immediately saw what was missing. Lude frequently came home early and always found the old guy working his way around the perimeter of all those beaten weeds, occasionally resting on a sun-beaten bench before taking another round. A single mother who got up every morning at 6 also noted Zampano's absence. She went off to work, Lude went off to bed. But when dusk came and their old neighbor had still not appeared, both Lude and the single mother went to alert Flaz, the resident building manager. Flaz is part Hispanic, part Samoan. A bit of a giant, you might say. 6'4", 245 pounds, virtually no body fat. Vandals, junkies, you name it. They get near the building and Flaz will lunge at them like a pit bull raised in a crack house. I don't think he believes size and strength are invincible. If the interlopers are carrying, he'll show him his own gun collection. But he'll draw on them too. Faster than Billy the Kid. But as soon as Lude voiced his suspicion about the old man, Pitbull and Billy the Kid went straight out the window. Flaze suddenly couldn't find his keys. He started muttering about calling the owner of the building. After 20 minutes, Lude was so fed up with his hemming and hawing, he offered to handle the whole thing himself. Flaze immediately found the keys, and with a big grin plopped them into Lude's outstretched hands. Flaze told me he later had never seen a dead body before, and there was no question that there would be a body And that just didn't sit well with Flays. "We knew what we'd find," he said. "We knew that guy was dead." The police found Zampano just like Lude found him, lying face down on the floor. The paramedics said there was nothing unusual, just the way it goes. 80-some years and the inevitable kerplunk. The system goes down, lights blink out, and there you have it. Another body on the floor, surrounded by things that don't mean much to anyone except the one who can't take any of them along. Still, this was better than the prostitute the paramedics had seen earlier that day. She'd been torn to pieces in her hotel room, parts of her used to paint the walls and ceiling red. Compared to that, this almost seemed pleasant. The whole process took a while, police combing through and going, paramedics attending to the body, for one thing making sure the old man really was dead, neighbors, and eventually even Flays poking their heads in to gawk, wonder, or just graze on a scene that might someday resemble their own end. When it was finally over, it was very late. Lude stood alone in the apartment, the corpse gone, officials gone, even Flays, the neighbors, and the other assorted snoops all gone. Not a soul in sight. 80 fucking years old, alone in that piss hole, Lude had told me later. I don't want to end up like that. No wife, no kids, nobody at all. Not even one fucking friend. I must have laughed because Lude suddenly turned on me. "Hey, Haas, don't think young and squirting lots of cum guarantees you shit. Look at yourself. Lots of working in a tattoo shop, falling for some stripper named Thumper." And he was sure right about one thing. Zampano had no family, no friends, and hardly a penny to his name. The next day the landlord posted a notice of abandonment, and a week later, after declaring that the contents of the apartment were worth less than $300, he called some charity to haul the stuff away. That was the night Lude made his awful discovery. Right before the boys from Goodwill, or wherever they came from, swept in with their gloves and hand trucks. When the phones rang, I was fast asleep. Anybody else would have hung up, but Lude's a good enough friend. I actually dragged my ass out of bed at 3 in the morning and headed over to Franklin. He was waiting outside the gate with a wicked gleam in his eye. I should have turned around right then. I should have known something was up. At the very least, I should have sensed the consequence lingering in the air. In the hour, in Lude's stare, in all of it, and fuck. I must have been some kind of moron to been so obvious to all those signs. The way Lude's keys rattled like bone chimes as he opened the main gate. The hinges suddenly shrieking as if we weren't entering a crowded building, but some ancient moss-eaten crypt. Or the way we padded down the dank hallway, buried in shadows, and lamps above hung with spangles of light that, I swear now, must have been the work of gray, primitive spiders. Or, probably the most important of all, the way Lude whispered when he told me things I couldn't give a damn about back then, but now, Well, my nights would be a great deal shorter if I didn't have to remember them. Ever see yourself doing something in the past, and no matter how many times you remember it, you still want to scream stop? Somehow redirect the action, reorder the present. I feel that way now, watching myself tugged stupidly along by inertia, my own inquisitiveness, or whatever else. And it must have been something else. Though what exactly, I have no clue. Maybe nothing. Maybe nothing's at all a pretty meaningless combination of words. Nothing's all. But one I like just the same. It doesn't matter anyway. Whatever orders the path of all my yesterdays was strong enough that the night to draw me past all those sleepers, kept safely at bay from the living, locked behind their sturdy doors, until I stood at the end of the hall, facing the last door on the left, an unremarkable door too, but still a door to the dead. Lude, of course, had been unaware of the unsettling characteristics of our little journey to the back of the building. He had been recounting to me in many ways, dwelling upon what had happened following the old man's death. "Two things, Hoss," Lude muttered as the gate glided open. "Not that they were much difference. As far as I can tell, he was right. They have very little to do with what follows. I include them only because it's part of the history surrounding Zampano's death. Hopefully you'll be able to make sense of what I represent, though still fail to understand. The first peculiar thing, Lude told me, leading the way around the short flight of stairs, were the cats. Apparently, in the months preceding the old man's death, the cats had begun to disappear. By the time he died, they were all gone. I saw one with its head ripped off, another with its guts strewn out over the sidewalk. Mostly, though, they just vanished. The second peculiar thing, you'll see for yourself," Lude said, lowering his voice even more as we slipped past the room of what looked suspiciously like a coven of musicians, all of them listening intently to headphones, passing around a spliff. "Right next to the body," Lude continued, "I found these gouges in the hardwood floor. A good 6 or 7 inches long. Very weird. But since the old man showed no signs of physical trauma, the cops just let it go." He stopped. We'd reached the door. Now I shudder. Back then I think I was elsewhere. More than likely wigging out daydreaming over Thumper. This will probably wig you out, I don't care. But one night I even rented Bambi and got a hard-on. That's how bad I had it for her. Thumper was something else. She sure beat the hell out of Clara English. Perhaps at that moment I was even thinking about what would happen if the two got into a catfight. One thing's for sure, though. When I heard Lude turn the bolt and open Zampano's door, I lost sight of those dreams. What hit me first was the smell. It wasn't a bad smell, just an incredibly strong. It wasn't one thing either. It was extremely layered, a patina upon progressive patina of odor, the actual source of which had long since evaporated. Back then it had overwhelmed me, so much of it cloying, bitter, rotten, even mean. These days I can no longer remember the smell, only my reaction to it. Still, even if I had to give it a name, I would call it the scent of human history. A composite of sweat, urine, shit, blood, flesh, and semen, as well as joy, sorrow, jealousy, rage, vengeance, fear, love, hope, and a whole lot more, all of which probably sounds pretty ridiculous, especially since the abilities of my nose are not really relevant here. What's important, though, is that the smell was complex for a reason. All the windows were nailed shut and sealed with caulking. The front entrance of the courtyard doors were all storm-proofed. Even the vents were covered in duct tape. That said, this peculiar effort to eliminate any ventilation in this tiny apartment did not culminate with bars on the windows or multiple locks on the doors. Zampano is not afraid of the outside world, as I've already pointed out. He was even fearless enough to brave the LA public transportation system for an occasional trip to the beach, an adventure even I am afraid to make. The best guess now is that he had sealed his apartment in an effort to retain the various emanations of his things and himself. Where his things were concerned, they ran the spectrum. Tattered furniture, unused candles, ancient shoes, these in particular were looking sad and wounded. Ceramic bowls as well as glass jars and small wood boxes full of rivets, rubber bands, seashells, matches, peanut shells, and thousands of different kinds of elaborate shaped and colored buttons. One ancient beer stein held nothing more than discarded perfume bottles. As I discovered, the refrigerator wasn't empty, but there wasn't any food in it either. Zampano had crammed it full of strange, pale books. Of course, all of that is gone now. Long gone. And the smell, too. I left with only a few scattered mental snapshots. A battered Zippo lighter with a patent pending looking a little like a tiny spiral staircase winding down onto a bulbous interior of the staircase of a light socket. And for some odd reason, what I remember most of all, a very old tube of chapstick with an amber-like resin, hard and cracked, which still isn't entirely accurate. Though don't be misled into thinking I'm not trying to be accurate. There were, I admit, other things I recall about his place. They just don't seem relevant now. To my eye, it was just junk. Time having performed no economic alchemy there, which hardly mattered, as Lude hadn't called me over to root around in these particular and, to use one of those big words I would eventually learn in the ensuing months, deracinated details of Zampano's life. Sure enough, just as my friend had described, on the floor, in fact, practically dead center, were 4 marks, all of them longer than a hand, jagged bits of wood carved up by something neither one of us cared to imagine. But that's not what Lude wanted me to see either. He was pointing at something else, which hardly impressed me when I was first glanced at its implacable shape. Truth be told, I was still having a hard time taking my eyes off the scarred floor. I even reached out to touch with one of the protruding splinters. What did I know then? What do I know now? At least some of the horror I took away at the 4 in the morning you now have before you, waiting for you a little like it waited for me at that night, only without these few covering pages. I discovered there were reams and reams of it, Endless snarls of words, sometimes twisting into meaning, sometimes into nothing at all, frequently breaking apart, always branching off into other pieces I'd come across later. On old napkins, the tattered edges of an envelope, once even on the back of a postage stamp. Everything and anything but empty. Each fragment completely covered with the creep of years and years of ink pronouncements, layered and crossed out, impenetrable, lucid, torn, stained, scotch taped, some bits clean, crisp and clean, others faded, burnt, or folded and refolded so many times the creases have obliterated whole passages of God knows what sense. Truth, deceit, legacy, or prophecy, or lunacy. Perhaps nothing of the kind, or in the end, achieving, designating, describing, or recreating. Find your own words. I have no more, or plenty more. But why? And all to tell what? Lou didn't need to have the answer, but somehow he knew I would. Maybe that's why we were friends. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he did need the answer, and he knew he wasn't the one who could find it. Maybe that's the real reason we were friends. But that's probably wrong too. One thing's for sure. Even without touching it, both of us slowly began to feel its heaviness, sensed something horrifying in its proportions, its silence, its stillness, even if it did not seem to have been shoved almost carelessly to the side of the room. I think now if someone had said to be careful, we would have. I know a moment came when I felt certain its resolute blackness was capable of anything. Maybe even slashing out, tearing up the floor, murdering Zampano, murdering us, maybe even murdering you. But then the moment passed. Wonder, and the way an unimaginable something suggested by the inanimate suddenly faded. The thing became only a thing. So I took it home. Back then, well, it's way back then now, you could have found me downing shots of whiskey at La Porbelet, annihilating my inner ear at Bar Deluxe, or dining at the Jones with some busty redhead I'd met at House of Blues. Our conversations, versing wildly from clubs we knew well to clubs we'd like to know better. I sure as fuck wasn't bothered by old Menzies' words. All those signs I just now finished telling you about quickly vanished in the light of subsequent days, or had never been there to begin with, existing only in retrospect. At first, only curiosity drove me from one phrase to the next. Often, a few days would pass before I'd pick up another mauled scrap. Maybe even a week. But still I returned. For 10 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, grazing over the scenes, the names, small connections starting to form, minor patterns evolving into connections, starting to evolving into in those spare slivers of time. I never read for more than an hour. Of course, curiosity killed the cat, and even if satisfaction supposedly brought it back, there still was the little problem with the man on the radio telling me more about some useless information. But I didn't care. I just turned the radio off, and then one evening I looked over at my clock and discovered 7 hours had passed. Lude had called, but I hadn't noticed the phone ring, and more than a little surprised when I found his message on my answering machine. That wasn't the last time I'd lost sense of time either. In fact, it began to happen more often. Dozens of hours just blinking by, lost in the twist of so many dangerous sentences. Slowly but surely, I grew more and more disoriented, increasingly more detached from the world, something sad and awful straining around the edges of my mouth. surfacing in my eyes. I stopped going out at night. I stopped going out. Nothing could distract me. I felt like I was losing control. Something terrible was about to happen. Eventually, something terrible did happen. No one could reach me. Not Thumper, not even Lude. I nailed my windows shut. I threw out the closet and bathroom doors, storm-proofed everything. And locks, oh yes, I bought plenty of locks. Chains, too. Dozens of measuring tapes, nailing all those straight to the floor and the walls. They looked suspiciously like lost metal roods, or from a different angle, like the fragile ribs of some alien ship. However, unlike Zampano, this wasn't about smell. This was about space. I wanted a closed, inviolate, and most of the time, immutable space. And at least the measuring tapes should have helped. They didn't. Nothing did. I just fixed myself some tea on the hot plate here. My stomach's gone. I can barely even keep this honey milk stuff down, and I need the warmth. I'm in a hotel now. My studio's history. A lot these days is history. I haven't even washed the blood off yet. Not all of it's mine either. Still caked around my fingers, signs of it on my shirt. What's happened here? I keep asking myself. What have I done? What would you have done? I went straight for the guns, and I loaded them, and I even tried to decide what to do with them. The obvious thing was shoot something. After all, that's what guns are designed to do. Shoot something. But who or what? I didn't have a clue. There were people in cars outside my hotel window. Midnight people I didn't know. Midnight cars I never seen before. I should have shot them. I could have shot them all. I threw up the closet instead. Of course, I only have my own immeasurable stupidity to blame for winding up here. The old man left plenty of clues and warnings. I was the fool to disregard them. Or was it the reverse? Did I secretly enjoy them? At least I should have had some fucking inkling of just what I was getting into when I read this note written just one day before he died. January 15th, 1997. Whoever finds this and publishes this work shall be entitled to all proceeds. I ask only that my name take its rightful place. Perhaps you will even prosper. If, however, you discover the readers are less than sympathetic, and choose to dismiss this enterprise out of hand, then I may suggest you drink plenty of wine and dance in the sheets of your own wedding night. For whether you know it or not, now you truly are prosperous. They say the truth stands the test of time. I can think no greater comfort than knowing this document failed such a test. Which, back then, meant absolutely nothing to me. I sure as hell didn't pause to think that someday lousy words were going to land me in this shitty hotel room, saturated in the stink of my own vomit. After all, I fast discovered Zampano's entire project is about a film which doesn't even exist. You can look, I have, but no matter how long you search, you will never find the Davidson record in theaters or video stores. Furthermore, most of what's said by the famous people has been made up. I tried contacting all of them, and those that took the time to respond had never heard of Will Davidson, let alone Zampano. As for the books cited in the footnotes, a good portion of them are fictitious. For instance, Gavin Young's Shots in the Dark doesn't exist, nor does the works of Hubert Howe Bancroft, Volume 28. On the other hand, Virtually any dimwit can go to a library and find W.M. Lindsley and H.J. Thompson's Ancient Lore in Medieval Latin glossaries. There were even a rebellion on the 1973 Skylab mission, but La Belle Nicosie et Le Banche is made up, as is, I assume, the bloody story of Quesada and Molino. And add this to my own mistakes, and there's no such doubt I am responsible for plenty, as well as those errors Zampano made, which I failed to notice or correct. And you'll likely see why there's a sudden whole lot here not to take too seriously. In retrospect, I also realize there are probably numerous people who would have been better qualified to handle this work. Scholars with PhDs from Ivy League schools and minds greater than any Alexandrian library or WorldNet. Problem is, those people were still in the universities or still on the net. It's nowhere near Whiteley when an old man without any friends or family finally died. Zampano, as I've come to recognize now, was a very funny man, but his humor was that wry, desiccated kind soldiers whisper. All their jokes subsurface, their laughter amounting to little more than a tick in the corner of their mouth, as they the, told as they wait together in the corner of to of their outpost, slowly realizing that help's not going to reach them in time. And come nightfall, no matter how much they fight, or what they've done, or what they try to say, slaughter will overrun them all. Carrion dawn for the vultures will See, the irony is, it makes no difference that the documentary, the heart of this book is fiction. Zampano knew from the get-go what's real or what isn't. Doesn't matter here. The consequences are the same. I can suddenly imagine a cracked voice I'd never heard, lips barely creasing into a smile, eyes pinned in darkness. Irony? Irony can never be more than our own personal Maginot line. The drawing of it, for the most part, purely arbitrary. This is not surprising, that when it came undermining his own work, the old man was superbly capable. False quotes or invented sources, however, all pale in comparison to the biggest joke. Zampano writes constantly about seeing, what we see, how we see, and what in turn we can't see. Over and over again, in one form or another, he returns to the subject of light, space, shape, line, color, focus, tone, contrast, movement, rhythm, perspective, and composition. None of which is surprising, considering Zampano's piece centers on a documentary of the film called The Navidson Record, made in Pulitzer Prize-winning photojournalist who must somehow capture the most difficult subject of all, the sight of darkness itself. Odd, to say the least. At first, I figured Zampano was just a bleak old dude, the kind who makes Itchy Scratchy look like Calvin and Hobbes. His apartment, however, didn't come close to anything envisioned by Joel Peter Witkin, or what's routinely revealed on the news. Sure, his place was electric, uh, but hardly grotesque or even that far out of the ordinary. Until, of course, you took a more careful look and realized, wait, why are all these candles unused? Why no clocks? None on the walls, even on the corner of the dresser. And what's with these strange pale books, or the fact that there's hardly a goddamn bulb in the entire apartment? Not even one in the refrigerator. Well, of course, was Zampano's greatest ironic gesture. Love of love, written by a broken-hearted. Love of life, written by the dead. All this language of light, film, and photography, and he hadn't seen a thing since the mid-50s. He was blind as a bat. Almost half the books owned were in Braille. Lude and Flays both confirmed that over the years the old guy had numerous readers visit him during the Braille Institute, or during the day. Some of these came from the community centers, the Braille Institute, or were just volunteers from USC, UCLA, or Santa Monica College. No one I ever spoke with, however, claimed to know him well, though more than a few were willing to offer me their opinions. One student believed he was certifiably mad. Another actress who spent a summer reading to him thought Zampano was a romantic, and she had come over one morning and found him in a terrible way. The guy never drank, not even a sip of wine, didn't smoke either. He really lived an austere life. Anyway, he wasn't drunk, just really depressed, and started crying and asked me to leave. I fixed him some tea. Tears don't frighten me. Later, he told me it was heart trouble. Just old heartache matters, he said. Whoever she was, she must have been really special. He never told me her name. As I eventually found out, Zampano had 7 names he would occasionally mention. Beatrice, Gabriella, Anne-Marine, Dominic, Eliane, Isabel, and Claudine. He apparently only brought them up when he was disconsolate. And, for whatever reason, dragged back into some dark, tangled time. At least there's something more realistic about 7 lovers than one mythological Helen. Even in his 80s, Zampano sought out the company of the opposite sex. Coincidence had no hand in arranging for all of his readers to be female. As he openly admitted, there's no greater comfort than those soothing tones cradled in a woman's words. Except maybe his own words. Zampano was, in essence, to use another big word, graphomaniac. He scribbled until he died, and while he came close a few times, he never finished anything, especially the work he would unabashedly describe as either his masterpiece or his precious darling. Even the day before he failed to appear in that dusty courtyard, he was dictating long, discursive passages, amending previously written pages, and restructuring an entire chapter. His mind never ceased branching out into the new territories. The woman who had saw him for the last time remarked that, whatever it was he could never quite address in himself, prevented him from ever settling. Death finally saw to that. With a little luck, you can dismiss this labor as Zampano had hoped. Call it needlessly complicated, pointlessly obtuse. Prolix your word. ridiculously conceived, and you'll believe all you've said, and then you'll put aside, though even here, just that one word, aside, makes me shudder, for whatever really just put to the side. And you'll carry on, eat, drink, and be merry, for most of all, you'll sleep well. Then again, there's a good chance you won't. This much I'm certain of. It doesn't happen immediately. You'll finish, and that will be that. Immediately, until a moment will come. Maybe in a month, maybe in a year, maybe in several years. You'll be sick, or feeling troubled, or deeply in love, or quietly uncertain, or even content for the first time in your life. It won't matter. Out of the blue, beyond any cause you can trace, you'll suddenly realize things are not how you can perceive them to be at all. For some reason, you will no longer be the person you believed you once were. You'll detect a slow and subtle shifts going on all around you. More importantly, shifts in you. Worse, you'll realize it's been shifting like a shimmer of sorts. A vast shimmer, only dark like a room. And you won't understand why or how. You'll have forgotten what granted you this awareness in the first place. Old shelters, television, magazines, movies won't protect you anymore. You might even try scribbling in a journal or napkins, maybe the margins of this book. That's when you'll discover you no longer trust the very walls you always took for granted. Even the hallways you've walked 100 times will feel longer, much longer. And the shadows, any shadow at all, will suddenly seem deeper, much, much deeper. You might try then, as I did, to find a sky so full of stars it will blind you again. Only no sky can blind you now. Even with all that indecent magic up there, your eye will no longer linger on the light. It will no longer trace constellations. It will only care about the darkness. And you'll watch it for hours, for days, maybe even for years, trying in vain to believe you're some kind of indispensable, universe-appointed sentinel, as if just by looking you could actually keep it all at bay. It will get so bad, you'll be afraid to look away. You'll be afraid to sleep. Then no matter where you are, in a crowded restaurant, or in some desolate street, or even in the comforts of your own home, you'll watch yourself dismantle every assurance you ever lived by. You'll stand aside as a great complexity intrudes, tearing apart piece by piece all your carefully conceived denials, whether deliberate or unconscious, and then, for better or for worse, you'll turn, unable to resist, though try to resist you still will. Fight with everything you've got to face the thing you most dread. What is now, what will be, what has always come before. The creature you truly are, the creature we all are, buried in the nameless black of a name. And then the nightmares will begin. Johnny Truant, October 31st, 1998, Hollywood, California.